Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. There are going to be a lot of fireworks over the next 24, 48 hours with signing day kind of opening up. And you kind of get the feeling that USC is going to be one of those teams that are creating a lot of those fireworks over the next couple of days. Want to get into a little bit of a preview of what we might be expecting for USC over the next couple of days. Really excited to get into this one. We've talked a lot about these guys for the last couple of months, and now it's closing time for Lincoln Riley and the staff. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the USC fans, as always, thank you all so much. The amount of support y'all have shown as we've talked the recruiting trail, really going back to the summer months. The support's been amazing. We appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. More importantly, that USC commitment sweatshirt sitting right there. I think we're going to be busting it out a couple of times over the next couple of days. Appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start with five-star defensive lineman Jahkeem Stewart. There are two things that stand out to me about this recruitment. I think one most notably with all the USC buzz that we are seeing, it is telling me that USC is playing hardball when it comes to NIL. I think we knew Jahkeem Stewart. Yes, relationships are important. This caliber of player, it was also going to come down to NIL. And for USC to seemingly kind of take the momentum in this recruitment, it's telling me that USC over the next couple of weeks is kind of getting ready to play and be a big player in NIL, which is kind of a stark contrast from 12 months ago where you had opportunities to get guys like Derek Harmon and you kind of passed because you weren't willing to kind of spend some of that NIL money. A guy like Jahkeem Stewart, it's telling me USC's playing ball. And I think that's most important. I think secondly, and something you don't always say with these 2025 commitments, a guy like Jahkeem Stewart impacts what USC will do in the transfer portal. And what I mean by that is if you land the commitment of Jahkeem Stewart, you feel pretty good that he can be at the very least a rotational piece within this USC defensive line immediately in 2025. And when you have that, I mean, it will change how USC addresses the defensive line in the transfer portal. That's not to say USC won't be a player for defensive linemen. I think we all know they will be, but it takes a little pressure off you because you look at Jahkeem Stewart along with some guys like Gita Abasari and Carlin Jones going into year two and saying, we got some young talent that we think can kind of step in and be some significant players for us on the inside of the defensive line. So one, showing us we're playing in the NIL market. Number two, this could potentially impact how USC addresses the transfer portal over the next couple of weeks. Next guy I want to talk about, a guy that we haven't really talked about. I think this might be the first time we're talking about him in relationship to USC, Josiah Sharma from Folsom. He was committed to Oregon, then flips his commitment to Texas. There hasn't been a ton of connection with USC here, but he was on campus over the weekend, getting that last face-to-face with this kid. I wouldn't be surprised to see USC kind of assert themselves. Now, we haven't seen any crystal balls or predictions coming in. We'll see how this one plays out. And for USC fans, this is another name that for me, I'm looking at as potentially early playing time for USC. One, he has the size, right? 6'4.5", 325, a freaky athlete for that size. But I think more importantly, he's only 17 years old right now. He was 16 as a junior. And so all this film that you're seeing him as a kind of a youngster with a lot of physical development potentially left to be had. Really good athlete, exact size that USC is looking for on the inside of the defensive line. He's been one of my favorite kids in this 2025 cycle, and it's really cool to see USC kind of working their way in for a guy like Josiah Sharma. Next stop on the defensive line, we're going to talk about Christian Ingram, so we talked about Jahkeem Stewart and Josiah Sharma. I think both potentially year one guys. Christian Ingram, probably not so much. You turn on his film and say that there are some really intriguing traits, right? Some athleticism along with some length, and obviously with the 6'6" frame, that's intriguing for USC. And quite frankly, it's been intriguing for a lot of programs. I mean, this kid's from the state of Georgia, and Georgia went sniffing around, and we know Georgia's very selective in terms of the kind of defensive linemen they recruit. They've been around Christian Ingram a lot, have gotten eyeballs on him. So, the fact that Georgia likes Christian Ingram. I think that's a good sign for USC because they've seen him a lot. Now, it sounds like USC is in a good spot for Christian Ingram. I think this is a little bit more of a developmental guy. And I said the same thing about G. Abasari, who pleasantly surprised me in terms of in 2024 as a true freshman. So that's not to discount Christian Ingram as potentially being, a contributor year one. But you do turn on the film and say that there's not a ton of dominant physicality that you see on the film. It's a little bit more finesse and athleticism. You probably want to see a little bit more physicality that's added to his game. And so for that reason, it's not that I don't like this kid. I think there's a very high ceiling in terms of what he could be, but it might not be year one. But again, if you want to have a successful program, you want to get these guys from the high school ranks, stick them in your program, develop them over the first 2 years and kind of see what they look like year 3, year 4. I think Devin Tompkins is a good example of that. A guy that we kind of knew wasn't going to be a big time player for USC early, but has developed into a nice piece for USC on the middle of that defensive line. Now, going to the linebacker room, one of the crown jewels. You talk about like candidates for the 55 number. I think this kid has it all over him. It's really largely between USC and Notre Dame, and it sounds like USC has, kind of taken the lead with this one. Love to see USC recruiting the state of California, especially for these kind of players. Like these kind of players, if you're USC and if it's going to work with Lincoln Riley at USC, it starts with winning more of these kind of battles on the recruiting trail. Very similar recruitment to Kingston Viliamu-Asa last year. He ends up going to Notre Dame. You win this one, you have success. And I think this is another one that could play early. You talk about guys like Easton Mascarenas and Mason Cobb leaving the program. Yes, you're expected. You have some really good young linebackers and Eric Gentry coming back. That linebacker room is going to be just fine. This is a kid that at 6'3", 230, you take one look at him and say he looks like he belongs on a college football field. I think could play early for USC in 2025. And then if you start having some of these Cali kids have success early, it's going to be a lot easier to recruit the state of California in the 2026 and 2027 class. So this is one of those recruitments that you're getting a really good football player, but potentially changing the narrative amongst kids in California, saying, hey, you can have success with this new coaching staff, specifically on the defensive side of football, and you can come in and make an impact early. I think this one, you look at it and say you get a good football player, but potentially that element of changing the narrative around USC and recruiting the state of California. Last name that a really surprising name, Alex Graham. And I know plenty about Alex Graham as a Michigan fan. This is a Michigan target at the cornerback spot. I should say defensive back spot because he's kind of a versatile cat. Currently committed to Colorado. Alex Graham has a really interesting kind of backstory in terms of what he's been as a recruit. Was quite good as a youngster. Goes down to IMG as a junior. Doesn't really play much, and so you see the recruiting ranking kind of drop. Goes back to Cass Tech in Detroit, Michigan for his senior year. Has a really good senior year where he played both ways and made an impact. Two things I like about Alex Graham, and most importantly, the trend. He's playing his best football going into his senior year, so that's telling me that, hey, he's just getting better as an athlete and as a football player. That's important to note. There's a lot of guys that just kind of peak as athletes and as football players when they're 16 years old. Alex Graham seems to be a guy that's getting better as it goes. That's a good sign. More importantly, really, really versatile. This is a guy that could play safety, could play boundary cornerback, probably could play nickel as well. Actually, for sure played nickel. I might choose him to play nickel if I was picking a position for him. We know Danton Lynn really values versatility. I mean, guys were moving all around in that defensive back room for USC. They cross-train a lot, so he kind of fits what USC wants to do in the back end as well. We'll see how it plays out. It sounds like there's a lot of buzz around USC. I mean, at least for guys like Jahkeem Stewart and Madden and potentially Alex Graham, Josiah Sharma, going back to him, he's probably the guy that I'm most interested with. Love this kid. Exactly what USC's looking for. There's not been a ton of crystal ball action for him to go to USC, but you talk about some unexpected fireworks. Just kind of, and you all know I'm not an insider, right? But just looking through the tea leaves, he's on campus for USC over the weekend. we could see some fireworks there. We'll see. Obviously, we'll be breaking it down over the next couple of days. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.